I didn't have time to change, so you're getting business, Wulff, today. Collaboration is one of the most important parts of making comics, perhaps the most important part. If the writer and artist aren't in sync with each other, it can show in the final product and result in a bad comic. But it's not just the writer and artist of one particular comic that need to be on the same page with each other. At publishers like Marvel and DC with big superhero franchises, where sometimes a hero will be in multiple books at once, oftentimes multiple creative teams have to work together to figure out what to do with that hero. Especially if event books are involved, where you're dealing with tie-ins and crossovers and whatnot. Especially if you're dealing with multiple writers and artists on one single story, like for example the recently announced Kamandi series from DC. Because despite having some of the best names in comics attached to this project, if they're doing this the way DC says they're doing it, we could be in for a fascinating train wreck. So some background. Kamandi is a character created by Jack Kirby for DC Comics back in 1972. He was known as the Last Boy and lived on Earth AD after disaster. And his adventures were sort of like a mix between Planet of the Apes, Mad Max before Mad Max was even a thing, and a whole lot of Kirby weirdness. He's sort of connected to the DC universe, but not really. Sometimes he is, sometimes he isn't. It all depends on who's running the show at any particular moment. Next year would have been Jack Kirby's 100th birthday, and to celebrate, DC is releasing the Kamandi Challenge, a 12-issue miniseries with an interesting premise. Each issue is being written and illustrated by a different creative team. Here's that list. As far as I can tell, with the exception of Jimmy Palmiotti and Amanda Conner, none of these writers and artists have ever worked together before. Which is fine, that happens all the time in comics. My concern with this series is that each individual team isn't necessarily telling one-offs, they're actually telling a single chapter in an overall story. And the challenge, as it were, is that each team doesn't know what the team before them is going to be doing until they get the final script. Meaning that Peter Tomasi and Neil Adams won't know what Dan Abnett and Dale Eaglesham are doing until they get the final draft. This sounds like it could be a fun experiment, but you have to wonder how this is actually going to work in practice. If teams aren't allowed to talk to each other, how will they be able to properly plan out what's supposed to happen from one issue to the next? How will they know what themes and concepts to maintain and what to drop? This seems like it could be a fun little writing exercise, but for an actual product for people to buy, it seems like too much of a gamble if you ask me. Now, I should mention that DC has done this before. In 1985, they released the DC Challenge, which was pretty much the same exact concept, but with DC superheroes. I couldn't really find much on this story aside from a brief Wikipedia page and this article from iFanboy saying that while it was a fun piece of history, the story is very nonsensical. And you know, that might be why the DC Challenge isn't as fondly remembered as other big stories from that time, like Crisis on Infinite Earths or The Trial of Barry Allen. This hodgepodge of stories coming together, while fun and interesting, just isn't as memorable as a more cohesive, fully thought out tale. Also, there's the fact that this is yet another DC series trying to capitalize on nostalgia. I know that's technically every superhero comic, but this is a particular type of DC capitalization where they'll find a series of old and redo it again for the modern age. I'm talking your Before Watchmen's, your Sandman Overtures, your Dark Knight 3s, and now Kamandi. Now, granted, Kamandi isn't as mainstream as those other three titles, but still, people will go nuts for anything Kirby related. Not without reason, of course. He was one of the most talented and consistent artists of his era, and a lot of his pieces hold up great to this day. And while all the artists listed certainly aren't slouches, following up Kirby is a daunting task for anybody, especially on a character as closely associated with him as Kamandi is. Now, the Kamandi Challenge has reportedly been in the works since 2014, and it's not going to come out until 2017. So there's a lot of time there to make sure everything is right and perfect before it gets released. Here's hoping that all this time is for the best and we get a series that's as weird and wonderful as the original was in all the right ways. And that each issue comes out on time. This is a series that can't afford to get delayed in any sense of the word. But what do you guys think about the Kamandi Challenge? Do you think this is an interesting idea, or do you think this will fall flat? Let me know down below or anywhere on the internet. I'm glad this story came along because I've been wanting to talk about comic news that isn't related to the movies and isn't related to Justice League or Avengers characters. And Kamandi is the perfect fit for that. I like to tell people about other types of comics on this show as much as possible, and you can't get more different than Kamandi. It really is unique, especially for its time, and still holds up pretty well for the most part. As always, guys, new videos every Tuesday and Wednesday, and of course, Wednesday night, Wulff Den Live, our weekly live YouTube show. Come chat with us, hang out. If you miss it, don't worry. It goes up the next day, archived version, also in audio format on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play. And of course, this week, the week this video goes up, is New York Comic Con. We will be there. I will be there Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. If you see us, come, say hi. We don't bite, but we are a little awkward, so just a heads up right there. As always, guys, like if you like, subscribe if you really like, share this video with a friend. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. For example, you have books like Wanted and Kick-Ass, both written by Mark Millar, but drawn by different artists, J.G. Jones and John Romita Jr. respectively. And yet, despite the unique art styles, it's very clear that Millar's voice is the one being heard, and that the artists don't really supply anything to the overall narrative besides a different aesthetic. His abilities put him on the radar of the Avengers. Captain Marvel wants to use his powers to stop bad guys before they do anything, to prevent disaster before it starts. Iron Man, on the other hand, is totally against this. He believes it's wrong to punish people before they've had a chance to do anything.